There's true crime cases, and then there's the supernatural. And one is factual, and the other more of a belief. When the two come together under one case, it can make for some pretty extraordinary and scary stories. That's what we're digging into today. Welcome to Scary Mysteries. Here are 5 haunted true crime cases. Number 5. Sean Sellers.
No, I didn't come here to ask for justice. I came here to beg for mercy.
Most killers try to hide their darkness from others, but Sean Sellers, well, he wore his like a badge of honor. Now, Sean grew up in Oklahoma, a state with deep religious roots, but from an early age, he was drawn to the other side of all that. By the time he reached high school, well, Sean was essentially fully immersed in Satanism.
I met a girl and she introduced me to a witch. She told me how to do it. She told me how to set things up, It was an experience I'll never forget. I laid down and I began to pray to Satan as she told me to. I had to renounce God.
He carried the Satanic Bible with him at all times in his backpack and bragged about rituals and even consumed his own blood in twisted ceremonies. His writings from his own notebook reflected all this, as one excerpt read, "I renounce God. I renounce Christ. I will serve only Satan. To my enemies, death." Sellers' devotion to the occult wasn't just an edgy teenage phase. Now, this kid believed he was truly possessed and spoke of shadowy figures whispering in his ear, unseen forces controlling his movements. And because of this belief he had, well, it made him able to do the unthinkable at just 16 years old. On September 8th of 1985, Sellers and a friend set their sights on turning things up a notch, and they did so by targeting a random stranger. 32-year-old convenience store worker Robert Bauer, who was just going about his business as usual, refused to sell the boys beer. Without warning, Sellers gunned him down, later admitting that he simply wanted to see what it felt like. As Bauer bled out on the floor, Sellers claimed he felt a surge of power and even laughed about it afterward, calling the murder a fantastic prank.
I looked at him and picked the gun up and fired. We laughed and giggled about this man's misfortune, and we were filled with nothing but evil and hatred and anger.
But his thirst for violence wasn't satisfied. And 6 months later, on March 5th of '86, well, he turned his rage towards the people closest to him. That night, dressed only in black underwear, as to be able to wash away the blood splatter easily, Sellers crept into his parents' bedroom as they slept. His stepfather Paul was shot first, a bullet piercing his skull before he even had the chance to react. Then he turned the gun on his own mother, Vonda. As she bolted upright in terror, he shot her several times, ensuring she was dead. And Sellers later claimed he was enraged at his mother for interfering in his relationship with his girlfriend. But in the same breath, he admitted something even more chilling. He had performed an occult ritual beforehand, one that left him filled with quote-unquote, nothing but cold hatred. When Sellers was caught for the crime, he claimed he wasn't in control of his actions, that demonic forces had overtaken him. The killings, he insisted, weren't his fault. He was just 16 years old when he was sentenced to death, making him the youngest murderer in the U.S. to be handed that in 40 years. Even behind bars, Sellers wasn't done making headlines. While on death row, his story changed. He abandoned his satanic persona and embraced Christianity, becoming a prison preacher of all things. And Sean claimed he had been saved and that he regretted his past deeply. But 2 former wardens, among others, didn't buy any of that. And they described him as a manipulator, saying his religious transformation was an act, something he hoped would get him out of his situation one day. But in the end, on the night of February 4th of 1999, Sean Sellers walked into the execution chamber. Strapped to a gurney, he looked out at the witnesses who had gathered to watch him die. And before the lethal injection began, Sellers calmly addressed the room, saying, "All the people that are hating me right now and are here waiting to see me die, when you wake up in the morning, you're not going to feel any different. You're going to hate me just as much tomorrow as tonight. When you wake up and nothing has changed inside, reach out to God and He will be there for you. Number 4. Death at the Devil's Teeth. On August 7, 1972, 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma left her home in Springfield Township, New Jersey, with plans to visit a friend. She never arrived. Her disappearance went unnoticed by the larger world. Just another missing teen in an era when hitchhiking and youthful independence were common. But 6 weeks later, what was left of Jeanette was discovered in a place called the Devil's Teeth. It's a rocky cliffside inside Halldale Quarry, a place long believed to have been cursed. The witnesses at the scene described a bizarre and disturbing sight. Her body, skeletal and decayed, laying within a coffin-shaped arrangement of branches, small crosses scattered around her. And from there, the rumors started up pretty quickly. Some claimed she had been found on a pentagram. Others said she was surrounded by mutilated animal remains. And the word was that Jeanette De Palma had been murdered as part of a sacrifice, and whoever did it was still out there. The authorities were quick to downplay any connection to the occult, but the whispers never stopped. And part of that had to do with the fact that the region had been on edge for nearly a year after the brutal slayings committed by John List, the mild-mannered accountant who had murdered his entire family in their Westfield mansion just 10 months before. And now, another dark tale was emerging right out of Union County. And from the very start, Jeanette's death made no sense. The coroner couldn't determine a cause of death. There were no gunshot wounds, no signs of being stabbed or broken bones. But the high lead content in her remains raised eyebrows. Some suspected strangulation, though there was no definitive proof of anything. And 2 weeks after Jeanette's remains were found, the media got hold of the story. The Newark Star-Ledger and New York Daily News ran articles speculating that her death had been the result of a ritual sacrifice. Even her own pastor, James Tate, told reporters that he believed Jeanette had been targeted by devil worshippers. For Springfield Township, this was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The rumors of satanic activity and secret covens had swirled through New Jersey for years, especially in nearby Watchung Reservation, where some claim witches had been meeting for generations. The satanic panic really took hold. And people began locking their doors at night and warning their children not to stray too far from home. And some claim there had been other victims, that Jeanette's death wasn't an isolated incident. Over the years, theories about her killer have ranged from local cult members to someone she knew personally. But in 2021, a new suspect emerged, one with a body count that puts him among New Jersey's most infamous killers. Richard Cottingham, the torso killer. Convicted of murdering at least 18 women, though he claims the real number is over 100, Cottingham was active in the area at the time of Jeanette's death. In a series of letters to a journalist, Cottingham hinted that he may have picked up and killed Jeanette while she was hitchhiking. He even agreed to speak with law enforcement, but as of today, investigators have made no public moves to confirm or deny his involvement. And so, the case of Jeanette De Palma is still officially unsolved. Despite the years, the whispers continue. The organization Justice for Jeanette fights to have her case reclassified from a suspicious death to a homicide, arguing that there is still evidence to be tested and still leads to be pursued. Number 3. The Demon Within.
A woman brutally killed in her Bendigo home is being remembered as a loving and warm mother of 4.
Annalyn Osias, affectionately known as Logie, was an active member of Bendigo's Filipino community down in Australia. Described as kind, courageous, and loving, she dedicated her life to her children and her community. But above the surface of her seemingly peaceful life, a dark cloud was forming. The 45-year-old James Pollock had been in a relationship with Annalyn for 8 months before they separated in July of 2023. The relationship had soured due to Pollock's drinking and aggression. At first, he hid things well and appeared to be kind and loving, but once he got comfortable, he showed Logie his real side, and she didn't like it. And James felt slighted by the whole thing, of course, like he had been tossed aside and didn't deserve it. And he couldn't let her go, and ultimately Logie had to seek a protection order against him. It was the best she could do at the time, because nobody can see the future, but if they had, they would have realized that piece of paper wasn't going to be nearly enough. On the night of October 29, 2023, Pollock sat back and drank about half a bottle of vodka before mixing it with a dose of antipsychotic medication. That's when he got up enough courage to go and face Logie at her home. And he drove there, broke a bedroom window, and ripped a security plate off its hinges to gain entry. Inside, he launched a savage attack, dragging Annalyn from her bed, bashing her head against the floor before ultimately stabbing her to death. And all this took place, sadly, right in front of her 2 young daughters. And when he was done, Pollock fled the scene, but hours later, police found him at a nearby reservoir, injured and incoherent. He was arrested and charged. There was no denying what he had done. But during the court proceedings, Pollock claimed it wasn't his fault. Now, he said he had no memory of the murder at all, attributing his actions to a demonic voice that compelled him to kill. He reported hearing his uncle's voice telling him that Annalyn was a witch. That's what led to his violent outburst. Forensic psychiatrist Professor Andrew Carroll diagnosed Pollock with schizotype disorder, noting his propensity for explosive rage. However, prosecutor Nanette Rogers argued that Pollock exaggerated his symptoms to seek a mental impairment defense, emphasizing the premeditated nature of his crime. And the court also heard that Pollock had a history of violent behavior. For example, in 1999, when he was 20, he stabbed a stranger 3 times, puncturing a lung. At the time of Annalyn's murder, he was already facing charges of assault against her from July. And the justice condemned Pollock's actions as cruel, vicious, and entirely merciless. They also acknowledged the devastating impact on Annalyn's children, who were left orphaned, and the broader community's sense of helplessness. As a result, in December of 2024, Pollock was sentenced to 24 years and 6 months in prison. The judge's remarks overall underscored the urgent need for society to address the utterly terrifying rate at which women are being killed by their male partners. Number 2. The Aberfan Prophecy.
A generation perished in Aberfan. In a few minutes, nearly 200 children, happy because they would begin a holiday that afternoon, were in doubt. And for them, there was no holiday, no half-term. It was to be their final term.
In October of 1966, in the coal mining town of Aberfan, Wales, 10-year-old Errol Mae Jones approached her mother with some haunting words when she told her out of the blue, "Mummy, I'm not afraid to die." And she was too young to be seriously discussing concepts like mortality, so her mother brushed them off, thinking nothing of it. And it really wouldn't have made the history books had it not been the events that unfolded in the weeks that followed, which all culminated in one of the worst tragedies in all of Welsh history. The next day, Errol Mae came to her mother again, and this time it wasn't just a passing remark. It was a dream she desperately wanted to talk about. She explained that she had dreamt where she went off to school one day, but when she got there, the school was gone in a sense. In her words, she said something black had come down and covered it entirely. So, it's a bit of a strange dream, but we've all had them. And to be honest, it wasn't the craziest thing to say, as the town lived under a massive coal tip, which is an enormous heap of mining waste that was perched on the hillside above Aberfan. The people of the town had worried about it for years, so maybe the dream was just a reflection of that fear. Errol Mae maybe heard people talking about it, and it made its way into her subconscious. That dream was on October 20th, The next morning, October 21st, Errol May walked into her school for the last time. At precisely 9:15 a.m., an avalanche of coal waste, mud, and water broke free from the coal tip above the village. And tons of black sludge and heavy boulders and debris came roaring down the mountainside, swallowing everything in its path. Houses were completely flattened, trees were uprooted, and as the wave of destruction reached the school and it crushed the back of the building, it buried classrooms filled with children. 144 people lost their lives that day, and 116 of them were children. Errol May Jones was among the dead. Had she somehow seen what was coming, or was it all just a coincidence? Well, this is where the story gets really weird. As the town mourned, a psychiatrist named Dr. John Barker got word of what the little girl had seen in her dreams, and curiously wondered if maybe someone else had experienced something similar. So Barker reached out to a local newspaper asking people to write in if they had experienced anything unusual leading up to the disaster, and the response was overwhelming. He received 76 letters in total from people in the small town, claiming to have had dreams or visions about the spill before it ever happened. One woman, Caroline Miller, had an unsettling vision the night before the tragedy. As she saw an old schoolhouse nestled in a valley, a Welsh miner, and then an avalanche of coal roaring down a mountainside. But the most chilling part was she saw a little boy, terrified, frozen in fear. And then she saw rescue workers trying to save him. The next morning, she told her church group and her neighbor about the vision, and that afternoon, she heard the news. More than that, 2 days later, as she watched the coverage on TV, she saw the exact same boy from her vision, alive but grief-stricken. Standing beside him was one of the rescuers, wearing the same peaked cap she had seen in her mind. Another woman, Mary Hennessy, had a terrifyingly vivid dream the night before the tragedy. In it, she saw children in a schoolroom playing in small groups. And she noticed long wooden bars at the end of the room, and the children were trying to climb over them, trying to escape. But before they could, one little child slipped out of sight, and then came the chaos. She saw people screaming, crying, covering their faces in horror. The sheer panic of it all jolted her awake. That dream unsettled her so much that the next morning, just 30 minutes before the coal tip collapsed, she called her son and daughter-in-laws to express how worried she was about the school. Errol May's dream, Carolyn Miller's vision, Mary Hennessy's nightmare, and dozens of others who claimed they saw the tragedy before it happened. But there was one common thread. None of them had enough detail to stop it. Now that is the cruel reality of premonitions, if they exist at all. People may get glimpses of something coming, but they don't get the who, the where, the when. The visions are always just vague enough that no one can do anything with them, and that raises an even more disturbing question. If the future is written somewhere out there, then what good is knowing it if you can't change it? Number 1. A pact with the demon.
Bibba Henry, who was 46, and Nicole Smallman, who was 27, were found dead 3 weeks ago in a park in London.
Bibba Henry was a 46-year-old social worker, and her younger sister, 27-year-old Nicole Smallman, was a photographer. And both had a passion for what they did, and both would unfairly have a chance encounter with a man who had to fulfill the deal he had made with a demon. And the night of June 5th of 2020 was going to be a celebration for Bibba's birthday, a gathering of close friends in the open greenery of Friant Country Park in London. As the night went on, their friends began to leave, but Bibba and Nicole decided to stay behind, dancing under the stars. The last known photograph of them, taken at 1:15 a.m., captured that moment. It was a snapshot of joy. By 2:30 a.m., though, their phones went silent. They never made it home. When their loved ones reported them missing, the police response was sluggish, even dismissive. It wasn't officers who found them. It was actually Nicole's own boyfriend, Adam Stone, who took matters into his own hands and searched the park himself. Now, he knew they had been there, so something must have happened, but he wasn't prepared for what he found. He first stumbled upon a bloodied knife, then sunglasses, and then, beneath the tree line, the bodies of the two sisters. And Bibba had been stabbed 8 times, and Nicole 28. It was total overkill and seemed personal, but it was also something ritualistic. The man responsible would later tell authorities he had no choice, so for him it was personal. He had made a promise to a demon. 18-year-old Daniel Hussein was arrested nearly a month after the murders. The evidence against him was clear, and DNA left at the scene, CCTV footage tracking his movements, and perhaps, most damning of all, a handwritten contract that he had signed in his own blood. In it, he promised Lucifuge Rofakel, an entity found in ancient occult texts, 6 female sacrifices in exchange for riches beyond his wildest dreams. His demands were simple: win the lottery, become powerful, but first, he needed to spill blood. The contract was detailed and methodical. In it, Hussein had laid out a plan to kill 6 women every 6 months. He had already started with Bibba and Nicole. The only reason he didn't continue, a deep gash on his hand he sustained during the murders. It was a wound that needed medical attention, and because of that, in the end, it led authorities straight to him. Now, Hussein had actually been on authorities' radar for years. As a teenager, he was flagged by the UK's Prevent program for accessing far-right propaganda.
In October 2017, came out May 2018. During that time, he received support from social services, health, his own school, and the Prevent Channel program.
And he was drawn to violent ideologies and fascinated by extremist rhetoric. But his most dangerous influence came from an American occultist named Matthew Lawrence, better known online as EA Coding. And Coding was a self-proclaimed expert in black magic and a recruiter. His teachings promised power, wealth, and control, all at a cost, of course. Hussein devoured these lessons, interacting on Coding's satanic forum for years, even logging in just hours before his arrest. And he followed the man's instructions to the letter. He made his pact in the dark and signed it in blood and carried out the ritual just as he had been taught. But when the demon failed to deliver, when the lottery winnings never came, all he was left with was the weight of his crimes. And that weight was undeniable in court. Hussein never showed any remorse. He claimed he had memory problems, refused to answer questions, and maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. But the jury didn't buy it. On July 6th of 2021, he was convicted of both murders. In October, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 35 years. The judge made it clear this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a deliberate, calculated execution carried out with ruthless selflessness in the pursuit of power. So there were 5 haunted true crime cases. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you enjoy this type of content and you want more from us, well, check out some of the links down in the description. We have a huge library of videos and podcasts to go through, exclusive content, a feature film we made, cool merch, and more. I appreciate you very much for tuning in. I'll see you over in the next one.